let's talk about feedback. Not just rejection, but actual feedback. Because if you're doing academic work at all, feedback is going to be unavoidable. There's going to be comments from your advisor. There's going to be peer review. There's going to be committee comments. There's going to be reviewer comments. And almost every time, the first response is the same. A physical reaction, a tightening, a spike of irritation, a sudden urge to explain yourself to no one in particular. And that reaction is supremely human. But what usually follows it is where things start to go wrong, because people begin telling themselves a story. They didn't get it, or they're bad at giving feedback, or they're just trying to sound smart. And sometimes that's true. But focusing there rarely helps the work you're trying to do, because feedback is not primarily about the person giving it. It's about what the work is doing in the mind of a reader. And that's what we're talking about in this video here. I'm Nick. This is Dr. Cranky Pants Teaches. And if feedback keeps knocking you off balance, it's probably not because you're bad at writing. It's because you don't yet have a way to use feedback without letting it derail you. Now, feedback does not mean that your work is bad. It means the work is still doing something other than what you intended. Confusion, hesitation, misalignment, resistance, these are data points. They're not verdicts, especially in something like a literature review. Because a literature review is not a performance, it's a thinking document. Its job is to make your judgment visible. So when someone responds with, "I'm not quite sure what you're doing here in this section," or "this section feels underdeveloped," that doesn't mean you failed. It just means the thinking is not yet legible to someone who isn't living inside of your head. And that is useful information, even when it's delivered poorly. Now, before we go any further, I do want to name something that often gets lost here. Real feedback takes time, attention, and care. Someone had to read closely. Someone had to slow down. Someone had to try to understand what you were doing and where it broke down for them. That is labor. So when feedback is specific, when it's thoughtful, when it's engaged, it deserves acknowledgement, even when it stings. Care and clarity are linked. Clarity is a form of care. Sometimes reviewers forget that in how they write comments, but the act of responding seriously to your work is still an act of care, and that matters. Now, let's also be honest about something else. There is a very strong impulse, especially among high-achieving academics, to want all feedback to be positive. If that's you, pause here, interrogate that. Because if what you actually want is unqualified praise, then you're not asking for feedback. You're asking for validation. And those are not the same thing. If everything you've written is already perfect, then there is no reason to send it out for feedback in the first place. So ask yourself, what loop am I feeding here? Am I trying to make the work better? Or am I trying to feel reassured? Because reassurance serves the ego. Feedback serves the work. And those are very different goals. This is why consistently positive feedback should also raise some questions. Either the person you're asking is not good at giving feedback, or the way you're asking for feedback is structured to protect you from critique. And neither of those moves writing forward. I have never met a serious writer who believes their work is finished. There is always something to clarify, something to sharpen, something to rethink. The question is not whether improvement is possible. The question is whether the people you're asking are able to articulate what would actually move the writing forward. That's the kind of feedback you want. It's the kind of feedback that is care. Also, we need to be clear that some people are just genuinely bad at giving feedback. They only comment on conventions. They rewrite your sentences instead of actually naming problems. They tell you what they would have done instead. And that, to be very clear, is not feedback. That is self-expression. Now, we'll talk in a later video about how to give feedback that is actually actionable and humane. But even bad feedback doesn't get to run the show. You still have some agency here, so let's replace that emotional spiral with a very simple workflow. This works for draft feedback, committee feedback, and even, yes, rejection. Not forever, and definitely not dramatically. Give yourself space to have the reaction without acting on it. Strong feelings, they aren't the best analysts, so just let them pass. Do not read it as a single judgment. Instead, ask yourself three questions. First, what is the reader confused about? Because confusion is almost always real, even if the comment is clumsy. Second, what is this reader reacting to? Even if they can't quite name it. Resistance, discomfort, and uncertainty often point to places where your thinking is implicit or underdeveloped. And third, what is noise? Comments that reflect taste, agenda, or just someone trying to sound authoritative or smart. Every set of feedback contains some noise, and your job is to identify it, not internalize it. Not defend, not explain, decide. What revisions would actually make the thinking clearer? What feedback improves the work, even if you don't like it? And what feedback can you set aside without guilt? And this is the part that most people skip. They either completely obey everything or reject everything. Both are avoidance strategies. Because judgment lives in the middle, and this matters deeply for literature reviews, because feedback on a literature review is rarely about correctness. It's about clarity of thinking. Do readers see what you see? Do they understand why certain sources matter more than others? Can they follow the decisions you're making? And if they can't, the work isn't finished yet. Now, that's not a failure. That's the work. Feedback is not a judgment of you. It's information about how the work is landing. And the better you get at treating it like data, the less power it will have to derail you. If this helped make feedback feel less personal and more usable, that matters. Feedback isn't a verdict. It's information about how your work is landing. Your job isn't to feel good about it. Your job is to decide what to do with it. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.